Alright guys, let's now send an actual message to the database. So what we have in the layout is an edit text, and we want and an image button next to it, and we want, as soon as we click this button, for whatever is in the edit text to be sent directly to the database for those users. So let's see how we can do that. The first thing, of course, will be to create those objects. So we'll start with the edit text, and I'll call it message box, and then private image button send, and I'll initialize those down here. Find view by ID r.id. I believe I called it message. Yes, message. And I'll duplicate that and change this to send, and this to send as well. Okay, next thing we need is to give this send button an on-click listener. So I'll do that all the way down here. New on-click listener, and here we are in the body now. So the very first thing we'll do is we'll put the message in a string. So string message is equals to message box dot get text dot toString. Very simple. Next, we have to make sure that message is not empty, so we aren't sending an empty string to the database. So text utils dot is empty message, and we will put a not here. So if it's not empty, and if it's not empty, now we can actually start sending the message. Let's take a look at the database. So right now what we have is the chat and the users, and within the chat, all we're doing here is seeing whether two individuals have spoken before. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create another one, and this one will hold the actual messages. So the first thing we can do is we can create the path just as we did before. Here, when we're working with the chats, we first created the path. For example, this chat followed by current user ID followed by recipient ID, which matches up to chat, the current user ID, the recipient ID. In this case, it will be string, and we'll start by creating the one for the current user again. I'll call it current user ref is equals to messages is what we'll call it. So that will be the table name, messages, followed by a stroke. Then we concatenate the current user ID, followed by a stroke, and then we concatenate the recipient ID. Very simple. And then we can duplicate this and name the second one recipient. We can name this one recipient ref, and it will be messages, but this time we'll start with the recipient ID, and then we'll have current user ID. Yes. Okay, so that's the first bit. Next, we need a unique identifier for each message. Each message has to be differentiated from other messages. We obviously cannot use the message text because people can say the same things. We also can't use the user IDs because the users will send multiple messages. So we need a separate one just for the message itself. And Firebase has a method that can create unique identifiers for us. So first, let's create a database reference, and we'll call it message push. I'll call it MSG push just so I don't type too much. And it's equals to root dot child messages dot child our current user ID dot child the recipient ID, and then finally we say dot push, and this is what actually gives us that creates that unique identifier. Now once it's created, we actually have to get it, and to do that we can create a string, and I'll call this one MSG key, and we'll say it's equals to MSG push dot get key. Okay, so there's our unique identifier in MSG key, message key. All right, now that we have that, we need a map. So map, I'll call it message map, and it's equals to a new hash map. Okay, so message map dot put, and now we can start putting, dot put. Message map dot put. There we go. Now we can start putting in the details of our message, and we will start by whether or not it's seen, and by default this will be false. Then I can terminate that and duplicate it. So this second one will be the type, and it will be text. Next, it will be the time, and for this we can use server value dot timestamp, and finally the message itself, and we simply put message. Okay, now we need a second map. So this map holds the details of the message. The second map will be message user map is equals to new hash map, and in this one we will put first the current user ID, reference, the current user reference, followed by a stroke, followed by the push key, that's the key, and the value will be the message map. And then we can duplicate it, and I'm sure now you can guess. I'm going to flip these around. I'm going to flip this so that it says recipient ref, again followed by the message key, and then by the message key, and then the message map. Okay, now that we've created all our maps, we can finally update children. So update children message user map, and we can put an completion listener, and let's terminate first. And within the completion listener, we'll just do the same thing we did here, an if statement to see if everything worked. So I'll just copy that and paste it. Okay, I'm going to run this and we'll see whether it works. Alright, here's the app running. I've gone ahead and navigated to the chat activity, and this is John's chat activity. I changed the username to Johnny. Okay, so we click this and let us see what happens. I'm gonna say, hey John. Did this work? Okay, I'll click the send button, and now let's see what's happening at the database. And here it is. Here's our messages table. Let's collapse that. Let's see what's inside it. So we have the two user IDs. Let's collapse them both, and we can see within we have the converse, we have the other person's user ID, and if we collapse those, we have our unique key, the push key that we created. And finally, there it is. Hey John, did this work? Now let me do something. I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna go out of this. out of this, and I'll click on Williams. Message. Yes, it did. Okay, I'll send that, and as you can see, it's working. So let's see, we can collapse it again. Okay, it only halfway worked. There's still a problem. The problem is something I'd mentioned in an earlier video. We shouldn't be allowed to send messages to ourselves. I actually tested that on purpose. So this is going to William, and both the outer and the inner user ID are the same. So that's something that we'll fix in the next one. But it's a very simple thing. It's just a little bit of logic that says if this user, if the current user ID is equals to the recipient ID, do not even enter the message, the chat activity. That aside though, it has worked, and we have successfully sent a message to our database, and that is fantastic. So now in the next part, as well as doing what I just said about that validation, we're now going to see how to retrieve messages.